And let's get started. Hi, everyone, and a big welcome to the Year 4 PWN USA Policy Fellowship Application webinar. I'm Kelly Flannery. I'm a legal fellow at PWN in the Policy Department. Tiami's also joining us. Do you want to introduce yourself, T?
Sure. Hello, everyone out there in Facebook land. Those of you who are on the webinar right now, I'm Tiami Luckett, pronouns she, her, hers, and I am the Training and Communications Assistant at PWN USA.
Thank you. And my pronouns are also she, her, hers. So I think everyone who's on this webinar knows why we're on here and agrees with the reason why we're on here. The reason we're on here is because it's critical to push back, be vocal, and be heard when policies are being crafted that are going to impact women and trans and gender nonconforming people's lives. And this is really true in all aspects of policy and decision making. An urgent part of PWN's response is to build the policy bench and to make sure that the people who are most impacted by policies are the ones who are making and influencing those policies. So what this policy fellowship is going to help you do is it's going to help you to hold policymakers accountable and to ensure that they're addressing issues in a way that's grounded in human rights, racial justice, gender justice, and reproductive justice. It's a priority for PWN that women and trans and gender nonconforming people living with HIV are really and meaningfully a part of the solution. Right. There we go. So what is this? Why are we here? This is the 4th policy fellowship for all women, trans, and gender nonconforming people living with HIV. And part of what we're going to do is help increase participants' ability to engage in effective federal, state, and local policy advocacy. Now, for the why, that's a complicated question, but really I think the quote on the top speaks to it. In the federal policy environment, it's been historically inaccessible to women and trans and gender nonconforming people living with HIV. And in the current political environment that we're in, access is becoming more difficult and the attacks on our fundamental human rights are becoming more severe. But there's really been a significant movement, right? A significant shift in that narrative. I just want to mention in the 2018 midterms alone, we saw at least 100 women be elected to the House of Representatives for the first time in history. We saw more openly LGBTQ people elected than in any previous election. We saw the first 2 Muslim women elected to Congress. We saw the first Black women elected to Congress in Massachusetts and Connecticut. And we also saw the youngest woman elected to Congress. So while it's still difficult and while representation still isn't where it needs to be, it is getting better. And we deeply believe that all women and trans and gender nonconforming people living with HIV should have a range of tools that are necessary to live healthy, safe lives with dignity. Policy and advocacy, these are just one tool in that toolbox that's going to help us get there. So who should apply? We welcome all women, trans and gender nonconforming people living with HIV. We also very, very strongly encourage participants who haven't historically had a seat at the policy table. So if you are a young, Black, Latinx, or Latina, immigrant, LGBT, trans, and gender nonconforming, if you're a low-income person and or reside in the South, we strongly, strongly encourage you to apply. There's also like one core thing that all of our participants must have in common, and that's that you must have a strong desire to affect meaningful change in the lives of other women and trans and gender nonconforming people living with HIV. My sincere guess is that if you're on this webinar right now, if you're taking an hour and a half out of your life to sit here and learn about this policy fellowship, you already fit into that last bucket. And so I really hope to see your application. From here, I'm going to go ahead and turn it over to Tiami.
Thank you, Kelly. Okay, so what do the fellows get? Well, as part of the training, part of the course, you're going to get web-based trainings that are tailored to develop your policy expertise, right? And these are these coaches and the mentoring policy, the mentoring team. These are experienced people who deal in policy and advocacy, right? And so, I mean, like, they're just phenomenal. And some of the coaches have been with us from the beginning, from the time when I was there, because I am a part of the first policy fellowship, right? And so I'll talk about like what I got out of it and what it meant being a part of it in just a little bit. You also get to engage with national advocacy coalitions and access to policy experts, just like I was talking about. Those coaches, these are policy experts, and they come to us from different backgrounds, right? But they were the most helpful, engaging, patient people that I have come across in this advocacy that I've been doing since 2015. You learn and apply marketable writing, research, and organizing skills to support your professional development. And that comes into play like with your practicums, right? For those of you who have actually seen let's just say the third year who graduated, those were some pretty bomb practicums, you know, that they put a lot of work into, and they made it look really, really professional. And they are still using those policy practicums today to advocate for the needs of their communities, right? And so it doesn't just stop at PWN. You can take this with you once you leave the fellowship. Possible in-person training. That is the coup de grace. If you're able to get everyone into one room with the coaches and they have that one-on-one experience, like I'm truly hope that this is going to be a part of this year's program as well, because you guys will benefit so much from it. And when I was on the fellowship, we worked in teams, right? And so we were across different time zones. And so it really, really helped to get on one accord and having that possible in-person training. Also, the fellows who successfully complete the requirements of the program will receive a certificate of completion, right? I mean, I don't want to have to go through a year program and then like at the end, it'd be like, well, what do I have to show for it? So that certificate means a lot to me, right? Just to know that I committed to doing something, I stuck with it, I gave it my all, and to have the certificate that shows that I went through it. Next slide.
Okay, so we're gonna go into really significant depth with the content that we're gonna cover so you can mentally prepare yourself for what you would be jumping into. This, I just wanna give you sort of like a broad overview before we get into the nitty gritty. And so over the course of the fellowship, participants are going to complete a 13-part policy advocacy curriculum. This is something that we have been tailoring every single year. We've been learning from the cohort before about what worked, what folks like really were able to engage with, and what folks didn't think was as important to their specific advocacy. So we're continually trying to hone that. So some of the things that you can expect is reviewing the structure of state and federal government to understand how policy is developed and implemented on multiple levels. The goal from this is that when you leave this policy fellowship, you're not only going to understand how laws are made and passed on the federal level, but also on your local state level. There's a lot of opportunities to engage on the state level where you would have the potential to really impact the everyday lives of people who are living in your state. We're also going to learn to read, analyze, and respond to bills, laws, orders, and administrative rules. I'm going to be honest here. A lot of times bills and administrative rules specifically are written specifically to be confusing, to be difficult to interpret, to feel alienating. That is a tactic to make it more difficult to engage in policy spaces. So one of our goals here is to really break that down and make it accessible so that when you see a bill has been introduced in your state, you can read it and respond to it, or you know who to reach out to and how to figure out what that rule actually means. We're also going to deepen your understanding of strategies to affect policy change. So this is things like grassroots advocacy, effective coalition building, building and maintaining relationships with policymakers and stakeholders who have influence over policymaking processes. One of my favorite parts about this specific area of the curriculum is how many people walk into it thinking that they don't know how to do grassroots advocacy or they don't know how to do effective coalition building, but through the actual course, realize that it's something that they've been doing every single day. You know how to make relationships with people. Part of what this helps to do is make those relationships in a way that's going to further your policy advocacy. And then we're also going to learn pretty early on in the curriculum key frameworks for advocacy interventions. So this includes reproductive justice, racial justice, gender justice, and economic justice. This brings us all the way back to this learning how to read, analyze, and respond to bills. These are a framework through which PWN and all of our PWN policy fellows approach any and all of their policy advocacy. It's through the lens of reproductive and racial justice. It's through the lens of gender justice and economic justice. So we really ask, who are these policies actually going to impact? And how can we make sure that they're aligned with the core tenets that we believe and that motivates our work? Now the program itself is going to be a year long, April 2020 to April 2021. This is a long time. It's actually a very big commitment. And I really want to drive that home now, because it can seem easy. If you hear it and you're like, oh, 13 webinars and and then a policy project, I got that. You probably do, but it's going to take a lot of work. And I just want to set you up with the right sort of framework right now. So understand that there's going to be 13 interactive web-based training sessions. They're going to be held 1 to 2 times a month. There's going to be one possible in-person training, like Tiami said. That's really a really strong relationship building moment for all of the fellows. And so far, we've been lucky enough to get funding so that all of the previous cohorts have been able to do an in-person. But I do want to flag that that is funding pending. You're also, in between every one of your web sessions, you're going to get reading assignments and homework. The reason that we do this is because it's not enough just to be on a webinar once or twice a month. What the reading assignments and what the homework does is helps to really ingrain that in your thinking so that you're practicing it after every single session. And it also helps to show us, like, if you're not getting it, if federal budget advocacy was like too much to do in one session, then it gives me an opportunity to go back and think, maybe I need to slow down. So the homework assignments are really important. You're going to get coaching from seasoned advocates. These are your policy coaches. We'll split you up in policy teams depending on what your specific interest area is, and then assign you a coach that's an expert in that area. And that coach will not only help talk you through different advocacy strategies when you're doing your practicum, but they'll also be there just to chat when you maybe start to get overwhelmed with the curriculum, or if you have a question about something specific. We're also going to be doing 2 collaborative presentations on your policy issue-based teams. So Tiami talked a little bit about how she was in a team. What these teams are going to do is in the midterm and on the final, they'll work together to create a presentation on one of the aspects of our curriculum. So you're not only going to be hearing it, you're going to be teaching it back to your fellow fellows. All right, so here's where we go pretty deep, the tentative schedule. All right, so we start out on April 10th with the fellowship orientation. This is exactly what it sounds like. It's the orientation to the whole fellowship itself. We'll re-go over some of the things we're talking about here, and we'll go a lot more in depth to some of the tools that we use. So things like, do you know how to use Google Groups? Do you know how to set up your calendar? Very basics like that. And then we'll go into Policy and Government 101, where we'll talk about the basic structure of government, how the 3 branches work together. This is going to answer any of the questions you have about how laws are made or how the separation of powers work. Then on May 22nd, we'll start into 102. So 102 gives us a deeper dive into how government functions. And what it does is really understands how federal policy relates to state and local policy. So we'll talk about how different federal agencies impact and interplay at the state and local level. Then we'll turn to administrative advocacy and federal agencies. So this is a huge area of law that people don't really talk about as much as you would think, considering how much law is really back there in the administrative agencies. If you've ever seen an email from PWN that's asking you to submit a comment, generally that means it's a comment to the Federal Register. So you may have already engaged in administrative advocacy just by submitting a comment when you heard about, some sort of maybe attack on LGBTQ rights that you were like, this is unacceptable, I'm going to write something about it. That's what that was. And then we'll start into our key frameworks for advocacy. So we start with reproductive justice and racial justice. This is the first of a 2-part series where we talk about key frameworks for engaging in advocacy. These are really frameworks that at PWN, we center our policy agenda and policy work around. So fellows learn what it would mean to take a racial justice and reproductive justice approach to policy analysis and change. Then when we move on to our 6th web session, that's going to be Key Frameworks for Advocacy Part 2, focusing on gender justice and economic justice. We do the same thing, except we start to really center the conversation around gender justice and economic justice. And then by web session 7, we're ready for a bit of a break. We're ready to sort of hit the brakes for a second, and we pause and we make sure that everyone's absorbing this information. So these are really interactive sessions where, like I said, you'll tackle one of the web sessions and you'll teach it back to your fellow fellows. And then we ask questions. We try and figure out what's actually going on and if we need to spend a little longer on a certain topic. And then on September 8th, that's when we turn to policy research and analysis. This is one of my absolute favorite things to do. I love policy research and analysis. It's a way to look at policies and the ways that they actually impact communities and people in their everyday lives. So are these policies uplifting, respecting, and fulfilling rights, or are they actually harmful? Alrighty, and then we move over to in-district organizing. So this is meeting with legislators. And so here we talk about who key players are in developing legislation, how to use local networks and community advocates, and things like advocacy events when you're meeting with local lawmakers. And generally what we do is we finish this session with like a sort of a practice where I will pretend to be a legislator and you will have to come in and talk to me about some bill or something that I'm doing. So you get a bit of hands-on practice, at least to start getting you ready for things like USCA, where you might go and actually talk to a lawmaker or a staffer. And then in web session 10, we talk about working in and building effective coalitions. This is one of those things that kind of seems easy. You're like, I work with people a lot, right? I work with other people and organizations. But sometimes the fight for the shared goal is actually very difficult and fought with pitfalls. So here we go over what some of those pitfalls could be and how you can help create a sustainable coalition for the long term. In web session 11, we'll talk about building relationships with key stakeholders and policymakers. This is a very critical part of the advocacy process. It's important to know how policy is made, but it's also really important to know how to work with the people who are in power now and how to leverage the power that you have to influence them in making change. Web session 12, we'll talk about issue-based organizing. So here we'll choose some sort of specific issue, something pressing and timely as we approach 2020. And we'll invite experts who are working on that issue to discuss on how to organize and how to push for policy change on that specific issue. And then we take our final pause with web session 13 and we have our year-end review. This is again an opportunity for you to figure out what you do and don't understand of what's happened and ask more questions as we get ready to move into our practicum period, which is January 2021 through end of March, April 2021. This practicum period gives you the opportunity to develop and implement your very own policy project, considering all of what we learned through the past 9 months of curriculum. And then you apply that to create something that you think is needed in the policy world, whether it's going to be a fact sheet in support of a bill, an advocacy day. The sky's really the limit here. And we're actually going to pair you up with another advocacy organization. You'll have a host organization that's going to help walk you through this. And it's going to help you to talk with them about where they see the need for policy change and where you do. So you can start to collaborate with another organization during this process. All right, and from here, I'm going to turn it over to Tiami.
Thank you. So now I'm going to talk about like what it was like for me going through the Policy Fellowship, right? So first of all, I didn't know what to expect. I hadn't gone through like any political science class since college, right? And so that had been like 10 years prior. Like I knew the 3 branches of government, but like how they worked in tandem with each other, how they worked opposite each other. I had forgotten all of that, right? So basically how laws were made, stuff that was affecting me, I wanted to understand a little better. And so I got into the curriculum, but also like what was happening in real time, which made my time in the fellowship so valuable to me, is the fact that, you know, we were fighting Trump with the Affordable Care Act, right? And so just like Kelly said, you know, it teaches us the three branches of government, how laws come to be made, right? And I saw all of that, the comment period that we were talking about, we were doing that in real time, right? And so it gave me a deeper appreciation for it. I also became the training assistant while I was doing the fellowship, right? And so I'm making a point of saying that because this is a year-long fellowship, right? And it was at the time when I came in. And so to keep it fair, I worked for PWN during my business hours, and I worked on this outside of PWN, right? And so just to keep it fair with every other participant at the time, right? Because we weren't getting paid for this work. And so I wanted to be fair in doing the work and not get paid. So I set aside time to actually work on the policy fellowship outside of my work with PWN, right? Okay, and so, but yeah, just to be mindful, because it could have easily overwhelmed me in working for PWN and doing this program of PWN, right? And so that's something that anybody who wants to apply should actually think about. Will this be too much of a commitment for you, right? And what will you gain after you've gone through the policy fellowship? You'll gain a deeper understanding of how these laws impact you and how to fight the laws that mean you actually know good, right? Which is something that we see happening out of this administration all the time, okay? And so, yeah, so I really, really enjoyed like my team members and actually getting in and seeing how everything was coming together. Like that was the best part of the policy fellowship for me. I graduated at the Speak Up Summit along with all of the rest of the cohorts. And we keep in touch, you know, we keep in touch through it. And so we've developed this sisterhood inside of advocacy outside of like sisterhood where we need support, right? I can go to any of my fellows, right? And talk to them about issues that I'm having, like in whether I want to start a campaign or should I fight on this issue, and what it could possibly mean for like people in their area. Like we're able to bounce ideas off of each other, right? And it was just, honestly, it sparked something in me that I had forgotten long about, seriously. And so, but as my practicum project, because of the attacks on the ACA, I helped implement a social media kit that got used widely, y'all. And if y'all don't remember the outcome of what happened in 2017, we still got the ACA, right? So that's, I was saying in the beginning, you know, like how valuable these practicum projects can be for you as a participant, right? I'm just thinking about some of the practicums that I saw over the graduation before we left, right? And how they've taken that to their state legislature, and how things are being talked about in their state that were not talked about because this fellow saw a need and addressed it, right? And through the help of their coach and their host organization, they got the fact sheet, they got whatever their project was, and they took it. And they're starting conversations about U equals U. They're starting conversations about syringe programs, right? And I wouldn't have even known where to begin talking about syringes here in Arkansas. But one of the fellows put the work together, right? And so I definitely have a resource that I can go to. And if nothing else, you will see your fellow sisters as a resource, right? But yeah, just wanted to stress that, you know, it is a year-long commitment. And so it's something to take seriously. You will be better for it. Your advocacy will be better for it. And I just can't say enough great things about the policy fellows that I've seen come out, and their drive to do good, not only in their in the world, but you know, it starts locally as well. And so to take up issues that are not their own. I know that the fellowship instilled that in them. I know that it was all manners of parts of moving parts that, you know, just made them be the very best advocate that they can be. And yeah, I'm happy. I'm so happy to have been a part of it. I'm happy to be here and to talk with you all about what it meant to me and what I gained from it. And if you have any questions, let me know. I'm still a resource, you know, for any questions that you might come up with.
So much, Naomi.
You're welcome.
I think like there is no way, like you're so right about like policy fellows being able to determine the conversation that's been happening at some of their state legislatures, like conversations that would not have happened otherwise around something like HIV modernization, by going to their state legislatures and bringing their practicum projects like a fact sheet or a palm card. They've started something. And that's something that you all who are listening on here clearly have the passion and the power to do. And it's what the Policy Fellowship aims to give you the skills to do. So you can determine the conversations that you think should be happening on the state or federal level that might not be yet. Thank you. Go to our next.
You're welcome.
All right, so for the application itself, I'm gonna go over this a little bit because you might look at it and think that it's asking for a huge amount of information. So I just want to break down why we're asking for different information. There are 3 required parts. The first is asking just for general information, and this is really mostly demographic. All of this is going to be kept confidential. It's something that we need to know about, you know, like where you live, to know if you know who your maybe elected representatives are. And then we'll ask you some questions about your civic and community engagement. So this is going to be us asking what you're involved with in your community, what policy work you've done before. So if you've done something like contacted your congressperson, or if you've done research into your congressperson and know who they are, maybe you've participated in an advocacy campaign or a coalition. This is all going to be information that's going to help us better understand where you're at with your advocacy. I want to be really clear that this program isn't meant for policy experts only. If you do know a lot about policy and you want to join us to see if you can hone or nuance your skills, you're more than welcome. But it's also meant for folks who maybe need to brush up on some of the basics around how policy is made and how policy happens in order to engage in a different and more meaningful way. And then we'll be asking you for our 4 short personal statements. This gives us an opportunity to hear from you about why you're interested in applying. It also gives you the opportunity to show off your writing skills a little bit. These personal statements are really important, and if you don't have any previous policy experience, I encourage you to take the personal statement section really seriously. Maybe that's where you're going to show us why you're so committed. Maybe it's not that you have talked to your lawmakers a lot, but it's that you have the passion to do so in the future, and that's where we'll get that from. There's also an optional video statement, which we'll go over in more detail on the next slide. And then I just wanted to go over a little bit about how you actually get to the application. So there's 3 main ways. The first is that you can click the link that I have above into your web browser, and I will set up a follow-up email with that link in it so that you can check that out after we're done talking. You could also just go to pwn-usa.org, and on the little banner on the top, if you click through a couple of times, you'll see that the fellowship's there and you can click it. Another way you can get there is pwn-usa.org, and then you click on the training tab on the top. You scroll down and there's a button that says Learn About Our PWN USA Policy Fellowship, and you can click on that, and then that will also get you there. Alrighty, now let's go to, okay, so this is the video and resume instructions. Your video and your resume are both optional. Your resume is strongly, strongly encouraged. The video option we give for folks who maybe think that they're still in the process of developing their writing skills and want to tell us instead of writing to us about why they're so excited about being involved in the Policy Fellowship. So this video is 3 minutes or less. It's going to be responding to a question that you'll see online on our application. And then in order to share your video with us, you can upload it onto any sort of storage or file sharing program that allows you to have a shareable link. So something like Dropbox or Google Drive or even YouTube. All of these allow you to create a free account. There are very detailed instructions included online. And if you think that the video option is right for you, then you can always get in contact with me. If you're like, hey, Kel, I don't know how this is working, I'll help you out. And then, so the resume is strongly encouraged. Just that you send us what's on your current resume when you submit your application. You can submit it as an email attachment, Microsoft Word, PDF, whatever, to me. My email is Kelly, Kelly, at pwn-usa.org. And then to make it easier for us, when you're emailing it to us, include in your subject line your first and last name and the date you submitted your rest of your application. That way I can pair everything together. So when we're doing application review, we can be sure we're not missing your application or missing your resume. Alrighty, a couple of application tips. Go to pwn-usa.org for any instructions and program information. On the previous slide, I gave you some other ways to find the actual application as well. We suggest that you download or print the application instructions so that you have them as you complete the application online. That way you have them right with you and you don't have to flip between multiple screens. This one I think is a really helpful tip, and that is that you type out your answers to your personal statement in a Word document and then copy and paste your responses into the online application form. This is because Word has spell check and grammar check. It makes things a lot easier. Also, if something bad happens, like you lose internet or your computer crashes, that way you're not going to lose all of the time you've spent on your personal statements. So, like I said, take your time to answer the 4-part personal statement thoughtfully. These really demonstrate your writing skills and show us that you're interested in participating. And as best as possible, make sure you have a secure internet connection when you're pasting your personal statements, and plan to complete your online application in one sitting. So once you've done those personal statements, get a secure internet connection, if it might be at a library or somewhere else, so that you can complete that whole application in one sitting, submit, you don't have to worry about any lost information. All right, and so some key dates and deadlines. I hope everyone online here is now getting out their Google Calendar, their notebook, wherever it is that you keep important dates and times. So the application deadline is going to be February 17th, 2020. Wow, it's kind of crazy that we're already in 2020. And then we'll have our fellowship interviews from March 2nd to 4th in 2020. So for these, we'll send out an email inviting folks to sign up for an interview. And then you'll have your notification of acceptance. That should be emailed around by March 6th. That's 2020, not 2019, my mistake. And then fellowship launch and orientation is going to be on April 10th. And again, the in-person training is going to be determined depending on funding. Sorry about the mistakes on the dates there. I think my headspace was still in 2020 when I was making, or still in 2019 when I was making these. Those will be corrected before we send out the slides. Alrighty, and so for here, I'm just gonna pause. There's more information on the bit.ly, which I will see if I can copy and send around to everyone. I'm going to stop sharing. And if you would like to just unmute yourself and ask any questions, you're more than welcome to do so now. Or just raise your hand and we can unmute you. Oh, I think I see a hand raised. Yolanda, I'm gonna try and unmute you now. Allow to talk. All right, you should be able to unmute yourself now.
Yolanda, I think you just muted yourself.
If you can type your question in the chat box as well. I see one of our participants said, I have so much to learn again, been out of school and away from politics a long time. That's the case for a ton of fellows. That's a really common experience, realizing that now is the time for you to re-engage. Maybe something's changed and you feel like you're ready. So I highly encourage you to apply. That's part of the goal. If you miss a session, okay, so yes, that's a great question. If you miss a session or two, can it be made up? You are allowed to miss up to 2 sessions. We record all of them, so you can always go back and rewatch them and then show me that you're continuing to engage by answering some of the homework assignment questions. So you are allowed to miss 1 or 2. And I know I'm going to need a lot of assistance with the video chat. So there's been a long history of needing to do technological troubleshooting. A lot of these can be difficult. Some folks don't know how to use Zoom. Some folks don't know how to use the assignment program that we've used, which is called Canvas. And so in the first orientation webinar, we're going to go over the technology that we use, and we're going to go over it slowly. And then I will set up an optional technological assistance call where folks who feel like they need a little bit extra help can call in, and we can start troubleshooting one-on-one by doing sharing screens and whatnot. So while I understand that technology is a barrier for some, just please feel secure that we're going to try and take it slow, and I'm going to try and help you through that however I can. These are great questions. Are there any others? Okay, hearing none, I'm just going to remind you one more time that if you have any questions at all, feel completely free to email me. My email is Kelly, K-E-L-L-Y, at pwn-us.org. I'll put it in the chat box right now. And if your question is you want to be connected to a former fellow to talk through what that looks like, you should feel free to ask me, and I will connect you with someone who I'm sure would feel happy to talk with you. Like I know Tiami said that she'd be willing to talk to folks, and I know that other fellows are really excited to talk to potential incoming fellows as well. Alrighty, with that, I'm going to say goodbye, everyone, and thank you so much.
Thank you for joining.